It's that time of year again. On October 10th from 1 to 8:30, we will be gathering in Los Angeles for the Liberty Road Live Summit. Once a year, we bring together experts, authors, resources, and brands to help us examine and celebrate all that midlife, or the middle third as we like to say around here, has to offer. Come to meet other like-minded women thoughtfully investigating this stage of life, or come get educated and inspired by speakers and workshop experts, or come for the fun. We've got shopping, book signing, cocktails, both leaded and unleaded, and light bites. And together we'll end the day with our signature long table gourmet dinner under the stars. This immersive experience was created to help you consider your possibilities and be intentional about your future. And because we don't want you to miss this, we're offering a podcast promotion. Enter POD20, that's POD20, and get 20% off at checkout. Join us. We can't wait to see you there. Pursuing your future doesn't end at 40. In fact, it may mark the beginning of knowing who you are, what you're capable of, and what you really want. But knowing what's next and how to get there can be a challenge, especially when old narratives play on repeat. Liberty Road is here to share stories so that you can consider your possibilities, pursue your purpose, and move into your future with intention. I'm your host, Netta Jones, and we're here to listen, learn, and liberate dreams, one episode at a time. Well, hello, Liberty listeners. Welcome to another episode of Liberty Road. Today we have Shelley Paxton in the house, and Shelley is an author, speaker, and advisor, and somebody you're going to learn so much from today. Welcome to the show, Shelley.
Netta, thank you for having me. I've been so looking forward to this,
I know.
So thank you.
Ever since our conversation pre-Chicago, right?
Yes.
I want to start, instead of all the things you're doing, I want to start with your sort of origin story. Like, what was that seminal and really pivotal, as much as we all hate that word now, pivotal moment when you decided that your very successful corporate job needed to take a backseat to your sort of soul searching?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it wasn't necessarily my decision so much as it was the universe and my soul conspiring to wake me up. And I think that's an important distinction that I didn't understand back then. And interestingly enough, as you and I are recording this right now, it is 8 years from the time that I left my CMO role at Harley-Davidson. So it feels like sort of a chapter, and we'll get more into what that means. But the important thing is, like, I was living out this success script that I was handed. I was climbing all the rungs of the corporate ladder. My dad was a very successful businessman. He had started in marketing. I had been flourishing for decades, 2.5 decades, in a marketing or in a career that was advertising and marketing. I'd gotten to this absolute rarefied air, this dream job, being chief marketing officer of a brand that people love so much they tattoo it on their bodies, right? Harley-Davidson. I'm riding motorcycles around the world. And then, you know, I start to feel like, is this all there is? And I start to ask a lot of these really uncomfortable questions that, to be honest, I didn't want to face. So my choice at the time was just keep doing what you're doing, right? Like, how ungrateful you are, how privileged you are to even be asking these questions. And I was stuffing it down, and I was drinking myself to sleep at night. And what ended up happening, because we all know this story, right? So many of us have a version or a flavor of this story where it's like, we just ignored it. We tried to ignore it. We tried to ignore it. We tried to stuff it down. We didn't listen to that little voice inside us, which often starts as a whisper, and then it grows to a shout, and then it whacks us with a 2x4. And I got whacked with the 2x4 in the form of a nightmare. And so this is actually where my book starts, and it's the answer to your question in the origin story. What the universe and my soul conspired to wake me up to was I was living someone else's definition of success. and not my own. And so I ended up having this nightmare, a recurring nightmare every single night of my entire final year at Harley-Davidson. And it would take me on this crazy journey. It's interesting. I just read something from Stephen Pressfield, the famous writer, this morning. I love so much of his work. And it said, like, we all have these undiscovered rooms, in our soul, in our houses, so to speak. And my nightmare was exactly that. I was being forced, like pulled by this invisible force through these strange hallways, like this maze of hallways. And ultimately every night I land in the same dark, cold, windowless, lifeless room. And when I step into this room and I get chills and I don't want to be there and I just try to resist it, I try to back up, I try to get out, and I am forced to stay there and take steps across the room toward the only thing I can see, which is this dim outline of sort of, you imagine like a utility closet. There's almost like a dim flickering light that you can barely make out the outline of the closet. And I'm just like, oh, nope, I do not want anything to do with this. Like, get me the hell out of here. And so, of course, I'm, forced to go toward it. And my hand grabs the knob and I'm just like, no, 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 no. And I pull it open. And as I'm pulling it open, I hear this whimpering. And so, of course, my eyes immediately drop to the floor and I see at my feet inside this strange utility closet, my dog, my precious blind pug. His name was Mocha. And Mocha had passed away before I went to Harley. So like 6 years prior to me starting to have this nightmare. And I see him there and he's barely alive. He's malnourished and longing for attention and longing to be loved. But he is literally he was like this roly-poly little guy. And like all of his rolls are just on the floor. And he's malnourished and emaciated and skeletal and clearly longing for my attention. And I scoop him up and I'm telling him, I'm so sorry. Like, I'll never leave you again. I love you so much. And every night, that's when I woke up.
Wow.
And I didn't understand it for the longest time. And I'm telling this story because I find that when I explain the nightmare in detail, it usually it sparks something in the listener. And for me, I ended up asking for help and I ended up going to kind of an integrative medicine doctor who turned me on to the idea of slowing down and starting to meditate and to really start to understand and interrogate what was happening in this nightmare. And my true awakening was realizing that Mocha, my dog, was a proxy for my soul. And my soul was dying, malnourished, longing for attention in this room that I didn't even know I had. This person I didn't even know I was. Maybe this definition of success I had never even acknowledged or come to terms with. And that was the beginning of the next 8 years.
Wow.
And that we'll get into, but what led us to this conversation today, and to be honest, what led me to the work that I do now, and I feel so passionately because I started to realize I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone in living out success on somebody else's terms. That can so often leave us feeling success empty instead of success full.
I love that distinction. As I'm listening to you, I'm struck by how many of us have moments of clarity, whether they're in the form of a nightmare or a recurring nightmare or a daydream or an aha moment or hearing someone else's story like people are hearing yours and it's triggering something for them, but they don't necessarily know what action to take. What was the first thing you did when you recognized that Mocha was a proxy for your soul, that Mocha was a version of you that had been neglected and malnourished and needed care?
Yeah, I'll back up and say the very first thing I did when I found myself having this nightmare and just drinking myself into oblivion to try to incapacitate this nightmare, the very first thing I did was ask for help. And I think that's an important thing to say because so many of us, especially as women, and this, by the way, this was all happening to me when I was 45 and 46 years old. It is the very definition of midlife. And this sort of, the bottom of this U curve of happiness, right? Yeah. And so I didn't know any of that. So I'm obviously speaking with a lot of experience and wisdom from the journey that I have taken, but I didn't understand any of that. So I think it's important to say, especially as women, we're like, I can do this. I got this. And we don't necessarily, at least at the time for me, I was a C-suite executive and no one was having conversations about burnout, exhaustion, mental health, our overall well-being. Those conversations, I am really grateful to be a part of a movement like you are that's normalizing these conversations. And regardless of what it looks like for anyone who's listening to this right now, it's okay to ask for help. That is a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. So I think that was an important first pivot point in my story because I could have just stayed and who knows, become a raging alcoholic. I could not even be here today having this conversation. I don't know where things would have gone if you play the sliding doors thing, right? And so the second thing to answer your question is once I had this realization and I was working with this doctor and I didn't know this thing called meditation. And by the way, what I preach isn't meditation, right? But I really do believe in the power of slowing down. I do believe in the power of listening deeply. And I do believe in the power of us getting really honest with ourselves. And one of the questions that I asked myself then, and I still ask myself, and I love to turn the tables on anybody, so I'll throw it out to your audience as well, is what are you pretending not to know?
Oh, wow.
Wow. That I realized that I was deceiving myself. No one was doing this to me. I wasn't a victim of anything. I had an amazing career. I have zero regrets. I, on many levels, loved what I was doing. But I realized that I was dying inside. And I was lying to myself that all of the external validation and shininess and the accolades and the really sexy life I was living from the outside was enough for me. And when I started to get I slowed down, I could start to hear that voice. I could start to make sense of the nightmare. And then I could start to more honestly answer that question for myself. And that was one baby step in the direction of where I am now.
Wow. What a great question. We will call that out in the show notes because I think it's one worth reflecting on regularly, right?
Yeah.
The answer to that is, that question is one thing today, but it can be something else a year from now. So you ask for help. You start asking these profound and deep questions of yourself. You recognize, which I think is also key here, that you're not a victim, that you are in this situation to some degree by choice, to some degree because you didn't slow down enough to ask yourself what you really wanted out of life. But I think that's an important one. Often we can find ourselves in situations that are uncomfortable or we feel stuck and we're looking for other people or circumstances to blame. So I appreciate you calling that out. Was the book the first sort of outgrowth of this, where Shelley sits down, puts pen to paper and says, I'm going to make sense of this, maybe to heal myself, but really for the sake of others too?
It wasn't the first, although I think it was the first most public facing kind of manifestation of this. But the first was me making a really difficult decision. And I think it's worth highlighting this because None of this. Listen, the reason we don't like to ask ourselves really profound questions like, what are you pretending not to know? And the reason I didn't want to ask it, and some days I really don't want to ask it or answer it honestly, is because we often don't want to face the truth. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. And I am not here to tell anybody who's listening right now who may feel at one of those crossroads or facing what's coming up and just feeling almost panic stricken. It's not easy. It is not the easy road. And it is the only path through to what successful looks like for you and only you. Because success is going to be defined differently for every one of us. The currency will be different. The metrics will be different. The emotions and the feelings we want more of in our lives. Because at the end of the day, success is a feeling and not a checklist, right? This is one of the big things that I learned in my journey. So honestly, the way I got to the book was first to answer that terrifying thing that came up to me, which was, I need to really dig deeper and understand what's happening. What are the layers underneath what I'm experiencing, this nightmare and all the emotion and this question around, is this all there is? And this truth that maybe this success I've been living isn't the success that's ever going to bring me this fulfillment and this joy that I thought was going to arrive on a silver platter, right? And so that the first step for me, or the first manifestation, was me making the decision that I needed to take a beat. And for me, it looked like what I ended up calling my Soulbbatical. And I honestly made up that word because none of this was normalized. Nobody was talking about, a mental health leave of absence or taking, we basically had choices. In some companies, you could take a sabbatical if you had, served a certain amount of time. We did not have that at Harley. Or you could take, some holiday, a shorter stretch of time, but there was no word or phrase or concept that I knew of that said, I just need to take a beat and slow down and really dig deep and kind of go on this inner journey. And so I made this decision to leave Harley. And it was, levels of terrifying I hope I never experience in the rest of my life. And I probably will, because growth feels that way, right? When we're taking a step toward our edges, our growth edges, it does. It feels really unsettling and very discombobulating. And that's how I felt. But I think I wanted to back up to that moment because I really said, you know what? It's okay if I take a beat, and I don't know what that looks like, and I circle back to corporate. That's awesome. And I decided to take a year away and just to give myself the chance to reconnect with my soul, to reconnect with myself, to understand who am I when I strip away the titles and the sexy brand and the big paycheck and all of this stuff. Who is Shelley Paxton? And what if she is the most iconic brand I could ever represent? Because I spent an entire life stewarding McDonald's and Visa and Intel and AOL and then Harley-Davidson. And I thought, wow, I've been hiding in the shadow of a lot of iconic brands. Who am I? And so that was my first step, that then as I created this Soulbbatical phrase, this idea that I now understand doesn't mean leaving your job. It means it's a way of being that is in alignment with your truth and your values and your desires. But I didn't know that then. So I I gave myself permission. This is a concept. I believe in permission over pleasing. I believe I write myself permission slips every day on these little orange Post-it notes. Pick your favorite color, but I write myself a permission slip. And so this was the very first, without even knowing this concept, the very first permission slip I wrote was to take a break, to go on Soulbbatical, to explore who I am. And that led to the journey that became my book and that became my mission and that became my business. And I now speak about it as I quit so you don't have to. Mm-hmm. And I want to pay forward all of the lessons and the tools and the insights that I have learned, because we need leaders in the corporate world. Sure. We need whole, healthy humans making stuff happen inside companies. And so I want to pay this forward, and I want to share.
In addition to your statement about, I quit so you don't have to, and we need these whole leaders and these people who are able to help make decisions at high levels, who are paying attention to their soul. There's this other side. There's people listening who can't leave, who financially need to stay tied to whatever they're doing. And you just said you don't have to. You just said you can be successful. Love that statement. As long as you're paying attention to these other things. So let's crack open the book a little bit. And we know why you did it. And we know how you're trying to, or how you're helping us navigate this. So you're guiding us from just this conversation to an awareness and asking ourselves these questions. But in the book, what are these steps that we can take, no matter if we're working, not working, trying to figure out what's next, which I think a lot of our listeners are. This is a moment in time when they're either finding that they're not happy with what was, or they're trying to figure out what can be. What is their next step? Maybe it's from empty nesting. Maybe it's from finally leaving a career that they weren't happy about. Maybe it's re-entering a career after taking a break to raise children. So talk to all those people that I just mentioned about maybe the through line or the steps that you're taking us through in Soulbbatical.
Yeah, I love it. Your people are my people. I want to say that first and foremost. I mean, I love this ooey gooey, messy middle that you and I both talk about. And I also recognize it's exciting and it's terrifying, the things that we were just talking about all at the same time. But it being in transition, like my book is right there with you, right? I say in the intro to my book, I wrote this because there's a beautiful quote from Brené Brown. In fact, it's funny, I keep it also on an orange Post-it on my computer. And this quote it says everything about why my book is in existence today. Brené says, one day you will tell your story of how you've overcome what you're going through now, and it will become someone else's survival guide. And I honestly wish I would have just put this in the front of my book, and I didn't. And so I say it as often as possible. I think it's gorgeous. And I encourage more of us to share our stories. That's why I love the community, Liberty Road community that you are building. Because the more of us who are being really raw and vulnerable and sharing and supportive of each other, we realize we're not alone and we can be on this journey together. And that's what I said in my book, not even knowing a fraction of what I understand now. I just said, I got you. And so I called the book part memoir, part manifesto, more of us defining success on our own terms, and part mirror. Because as I'm taking you on this roller coaster journey of my life and what I was waking up to and realizing and the questions I was asking and the soul searching I was doing, I pause at the end of each of the 4 sections of the book and I offer up some exercises, deep questions, and sort of some assessment questions for you as the reader. So that's one thing that I think is important to know is I don't just throw my story. It is not a traditional memoir. It uses my story as a way to say, I know I'm not the only one. And, we're all going to go through many versions of this. If we're continuing to grow and push those edges, we're going to be on our own. I'm actually going to read you the definition of Soulbbatical because I keep this in front of me at all times.
Do it. Let's hear it.
I say a Soulbbatical, and this is my now version, not what I thought it meant. This is not leaving your job, because that is not what we're doing. But I say Soulbbatical is a way of being in full alignment with one's soul. It's a conscious choice to live and lead with greater authenticity, courage, and fulfillment. And I think it's beautiful. It's another way of redefining success. It's another way of saying we get to do life on our terms, whatever that looks like. And again, like you said, I love that you hit home that point that this does not mean you have to leave. And I'm really clear. I think when the book came out, because the title is Soulbbatical and it sounds so much like sabbatical, because it is, that's there was this mashup. People were like, oh yeah, well, I can't leave, so that's not relevant for me. And so I've learned a lot in the process of helping people understand what's in this book. And so that's one very practical piece. So you're on this wild and crazy journey of my story. You get a little bit of my backstory, then you get the story of what led me to Harley, and the story of this decision to walk away, and everything I experienced, and what was I reading? What were the questions I was asking? What was the soul searching I was doing, and then framed in a way so that you could bring some of those into your own life and sit with those questions and journal and explore on your own terms. So I think that's one important piece of it. And then throughout, I introduce concepts that are ever evolving. So as I've kind of landed on this idea of I quit so you don't have to, and that's one of the big keynotes I'm now doing, I've evolved a lot of what's in the book to be intentional choices. So these are choices. It doesn't matter if you are in transition, not working a full-time job today, if you are thinking like, I want something different. I want, deeper meaning, greater purpose, greater fulfillment in my life. If you are transitioning, maybe, yeah, you're right, from motherhood and raising kids, and now they're gone, and you want to figure out what is that next thing I'm doing. There are a series, I believe in this way of being. And so I believe it's a series of intentional choices. They're choices I make every single day. So I'm going to go back to one that I mentioned. This one is we choose permission over pleasing. So I'm holding up my orange Post-it notes, my trusty orange Post-it notes. And here's one that I invite everyone to do every single morning. Ask yourself this question. Grab your favorite color that makes you smile. Because first of all, that's just starting the day off on a great foot, where like every time I'm obsessed with orange, whatever color you're obsessed with. And ask yourself this question. What do I need? This is a great self-check-in. Take 2 to 3 minutes. That's it. You can take longer, of course. But what do I need today? What do I need to give myself permission to do, not do, and or feel today in order to show up as my most badass, powerful self? And then literally write yourself permission slips. It could be 1. It could be 10. There are some days where it's like wallpapered all over like my refrigerator, my bathroom mirror, and my laptop and all the things. And that's okay. No shame in that game. So sometimes it's super simple. Like, you know what? Yeah. I said yes to that thing that I really meant to say no to tonight. And I'm just going to call my own BS. I'm going to say, what are you pretending not to know? Well, what I'm pretending not to know is I don't really want to go to that event. I'm doing it out of a place of guilt and obligation. So I'm writing myself a permission slip to say no. Or write yourself a permission slip to take 30 minutes away from your computer and just go for a walk, even if it's around the block. Or do whatever it is that you need. Tell your partner that they're on kid duty for the next hour, whatever it is. You get to have fun with this too. So my hope is it also brings you some joy and it makes you smile as you're doing it, but it reminds you that you are at choice. We are all at choice, because it also keeps us out of that victim mindset we talked about earlier.
I was just thinking of that. Yeah. And everything you just mentioned in terms of examples, I was going to ask you, tell me where the pleasing part gets in, and then you shared the examples. I was like, oh, of course. Pleasing the people that you were supposed to go out with, pleasing the whatever work you were doing on your computer to take that break, pleasing your partner or your friend or whatever it is. and putting yourself, not making yourself a priority, which I think is one of the things we fall into as women, right? And when we're in this place or this stage in life, that thing has become a habit. And not all habits are good habits. Many are bad habits. And so giving us a mechanism to reframe how to get out of that bad habit, get into new habits, and how to rethink caring for ourselves. Those, to me, what you just said, that's real self-care. That beats a spa day any day.
Yeah,
but I'll take the spa day too. Don't get me wrong.
No shame in that game either, right? But I agree with you. I posted something very similar on Instagram because September is, this self-care awareness month. And I have a fundamental issue with this idea of like self-care awareness and whatever, because I think we just talk about these big fluffy things when you're right. The real self-care is, and I'll talk about a couple of these other intentional choices because they all circle around this idea of what does it really mean to show up powerfully? Well, it means taking care of our mental, physical, emotional, spiritual health, taking care of ourselves and our whole humanness, as we were talking about earlier. That's true self-care. And we need to do it every single day. And I think these things like, going to the nail salon, which I love, right? Clearly, I've got my orange nail polish on. Right. Of course, my signature orange. But I love all of those things. I love going to the spa. I love that. I love taking a really good, long, juicy nap. I love these things. But at the end of the day, I know I can't do that every day. What I can do every day is be at choice in managing my energy, where I'm expending it and what I'm letting in. And I am at choice in checking in. So you said something that's so crucial around this idea. Like, I think we develop habits over time that are, I know I'm guilty of this, that are just so ingrained that we don't see them anymore. So they're like this operating system that's just running and running. So what I love about exercises like this, and this isn't the only one, but exercises like this force the pause, even for 3 minutes. They force the pause and then the awareness of, wait a second, what do I need? Instead of rushing into the same old routine and whatever's on your calendar and whatever you've always done, you're almost forcing a disruption. And to me, that's such self-care. It's really beautiful.
And then you can be intentional about what's next. It's funny, the little thing that you're showing us to do with this sticky note is emblematic of the big thing that the book is about and the big thing that happened in your own life, right?
Yeah.
Many people listening, again, sort of like your reoccurring nightmare, they've had these moments in their life. They've had this thing where they believe, okay, now life is making sense. Now the past is making sense. I can see a through line in my life. You took it to the next level and said, I'm actually going to dedicate my life to my aha moment. I'm going to lean into what I've learned, the way I've healed, and I'm going to share that with others. Was that a conscious decision, or were you healing yourself in the process of the concept around Soulbbatical, speaking about it, writing about it, and thought, well, I'm eventually going to go back to my marketing gig, whether it's at Harley-Davidson or elsewhere? Or was it like, no, I'm done. I can't see the world differently anymore. And I have this message. I need to go out and sort of evangelize this new way of thinking.
Yeah, it was more the latter. And I'll tell you why, because I think, there's another piece of this that we haven't hit on that I suspect is going to strike a chord.
Yeah.
So I originally said, I'm going to take 12 months. That's going to be my Soulbbatical. And if I get itchy or anything changes, I give myself permission at 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, to go, I'm going to, rethink this. I might course correct. I just gave myself permission. And I think there's a powerful lesson for all of us in that too. Like, give yourself a time frame. And maybe it's, I'm going to give myself a long weekend. I'm going to take 3 days. And I'm going to sink into some of the questions that Shelley shared, or maybe sink into the book and the exercises in the book, whatever. Maybe it's none of it. And you just want to go away with girlfriends to a cabin in the woods, like whatever it looks like. Give yourself that space and be open to the fact that maybe you'll be like, oh, after 3 days, I'm good. Maybe you're like, I'm going to do this every month. Maybe you're like, I want more of this time. And so every quarter, I'm going to take 5 days. Whatever it is, but just be open to the fact that this could evolve. But it's grounded in paying attention, right? Paying attention to ourselves and how we're feeling and what's coming up for us and what do we truly need and want. So that's a little context for what I'm about to share. So I said 12 months. I don't know why. A year felt like a big round number. I had worked for 26 years in the corporate world, flying high, all the things. I felt like, maybe that's what I need. And I had just enough financial runway to go, I can live for 12 months. After that, I've got to find a way to make money again. So I also want to make it really clear that I am not a trust fund baby. I am not financially free, meaning right. I still need to make a living, sure. Right? So I think that's an important thing to note, that I don't do any of this as a hobby, but I do it all from my heart and soul. So the first 8 months of my Soulbbatical, I was going to, you'll read about it in the book. I was kind of on all these different adventures. I went to some really meaningful places. I started writing again. I really reconnected with myself. I asked some deep, profound and often brutal questions to sort of get to the core of who am I without all of this stuff that I become really attached to. And 8 months in, my dad had a massive stroke. And I still get goosebumps when I say this. My dad is still with us. So I will preface it by saying that. I will also say that my 71-year-old, wildly healthy, still running 25 miles a week dad is no longer with us. He was severely impacted by this. He had one massive stroke and one smaller stroke in a row. I spent months in the ICU with him. This was the next chapter of the next bit of my Soulbbatical, because watching my dad, whose success script I followed, step into retirement and then be struck like the healthiest person in the world, whose brain then just exploded and revolted on him. And to this day, he is severely brain damaged. He's not independent. He's unable to care for himself. He's never gone back to that life. And my parents both watched this retirement that they wanted to, that they've been postponing living, but they've been pushing a lot of stuff to retirement, evaporate.
Wow. And
we all know how many of us do this. We're like, when I retire, or when I get to this place, or we're constantly kicking this can of success full, and like fulfillment and deeper meaning and joy and the things we really, really want down the road. And often it's under the guise of when I retire. And I watched in a single instant that evaporate from my parents. And I have seen over the past 7 years what that has done to them. Neither one of them are in good health. Everything else, it was just the domino effect of the slippery slope. And it was as my dad was starting to recover enough to try to find words, and he had this lucid moment. We moved them down to Naples, Florida, and I was helping to move them in. And I actually moved into their house for 4 months. Like the last bit of my Soulbbatical was truly caring for my aging parents. And I learned more in those 4 months about what life means and how I define success and what really, really, really matters. I honestly think I learned that stuff back then. And that was most of what people learned during COVID, because I think COVID just brought into immense clarity for so many of us what really matters in your life and what your priorities are and who you want to be around and how you want to live and where you want to live. And I understood so much of that back in 2017, 2018. And it was that moment where my dad found enough language. And I remember he told me the story of his second stroke. And he said, he was sitting holding my hand, and I couldn't even believe like actual intelligible words were coming out of his mouth because he really hadn't been in that place. And he said he remembered when the second stroke happened. And he remembered, like, he died. Like, he was talking to me about seeing this light and being in this other place. And
wow.
I remember from the other side watching this happen going, wow, he's gone now. Like, he survived the big one and he is not surviving this one. I remember being back in the ICU. I remember being back in the same room. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I write about all of this in the book. So trigger warning. And also, I know so many of us have similar stories. And I was like, wow, well, what was that like? Because, I mean, obviously you're sitting here right now, Dad, telling me this story. And he said, yeah, because I finally realized that I still had work to do, but this time it was different work. He literally said those words. And I mean, I still feel the emotion right now. Like, I just started bawling.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. That message was for me.
Oh, what a
I have
gift.
Different work. I mean, you can see, like, It still makes me cry. It was and it was that moment. And you said it so beautifully. It was that moment that I knew there was no going back. It wasn't that I was anti-corporate or whatever. I think that's why I do the work I do with so much heart and so much passion. And I want to pay it forward because I knew it wasn't my journey, but that my journey would ultimately have a bigger impact than I could ever have in any one company.
Yeah.
And that I had different work to do. And it was to follow this soul journey, to tell this story, to share it with more people, to help others understand they're not alone, and to normalize this conversation in whatever way. And after that, it's like it just fell into place. I ended up having a conversation with Simon & Schuster. Soulbbatical ended up becoming a book. I started coaching to help others who were in transition, experiencing similar things. That evolved into speaking and more advisory work. And ultimately, book number 2 is on the horizon for next year. And I think it's going to be called I Quit So You Don't Have To. And it's the continuation because honestly, I'm still living this journey and this story every single day because I really believe in practicing what I preach and I need it.
Yeah. You know, Shelley, I think it's really cool that what started out as a 12-month break, you got to that 12 months and you let the next chapter lead you. You let that next door opening lead you into the next chapter.
Yeah.
That what we're hearing now is somebody's 6-year journey?
It's 8 years.
8-year journey of one step at a time. That you didn't say 8 years from now, this is what I'll be doing. You said, I'm going to take this 12 months. Within the 12 months, you had the heartbreak of what happened with your father. That led you to, I think, it was so much more than an aha moment. It was really a gift. I mean, I believe those words were as much for the work he still has to do as for you. Telling 100%. You is a bit of a baton pass as I was hearing the story. And then that led you to say, okay, it's the book, it's speaking, it's advising. I have more to share with other people. And so I want our listeners to just hear that this is a one step at a time, one door open, one window open at a time. And we intentionally choose to walk through those things. And those things become success-filling if we take the time to pause, ask the right questions, and be intentional about that next move.
Oh, so beautifully said. And can I just say, like, my favorite, the thing I want to make into a t-shirt is every badass accomplishment is a series of tiny steps. And you just nailed it. I mean, the only reason I'm sitting here now sharing what I'm sharing and us having this conversation is because I've followed those little breadcrumbs of the soul and I've trusted them and I've taken the tiny step and the next tiny step and the next tiny step. My experience in this 8 years is nothing more than the cumulative tiny steps that I have taken. It is not a miracle. There was no catapult. There was no magic. There was exactly as you said. It was intentionally pausing, listening, trusting, and stepping. And I think that's an important thing, especially expecting that no one listening is going to leave their job, or, it doesn't require radical action. I think if you really pause and listen and just commit to yourself, like, what tiny soul aligned step will I take today? Take that, put that in the show notes as another action that you can sit with, another question of like, what would that look like? Doesn't have to be big.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're not a trust fund baby, that what you had saved up was enough to live comfortably for a year, but that you also were honoring the work that you're doing now. This isn't a hobby. This isn't a passion project. This is your work now. Did that way of viewing yourself and maybe the lessons you learned from Harley-Davidson and your other corporate facing careers, did that teach you or prepare you for that mentality or for that way of thinking about your current work?
It's such a good question. I suppose in many ways it did, right? I can go all the way back. And even in the book, I go all the way back to, I did Second City Improv in my 20s here in Chicago. And I can trace through how improv and the yes and mindset and everything I was taught in that art form was like the best life skills I've ever learned. Yeah. So starting there, and I brought that into my corporate role. And then I think in thinking about how I intentionally stewarded these really iconic brands. My whole career was such a gift, and I was so incredibly fortunate to travel the world and represent so many of these brands in so many different ways. And I think there was a reverence for those brands and an intentionality and a respect for those brands that frankly, I never had for myself. I never, ever had for myself. And I did not see that until I started doing this work. And I realized that I was always an afterthought to these other, what I consider bigger brands. Like I said earlier, I lived in the shadow very willingly. I lived in the shadow. And when I stepped out from the shadow, it was scary. It is scary. Every day it's scary because I am my brand. And at the same time, I do the things I do and I share what I share because I do really have more reverence and respect and intentionality around who I am and what I want and how I define success and my own worth and value. Yeah. Right? I think I just wrote that stuff off because I was putting my worth and value, I was attaching my worth and value. And I know so many of us do this, especially women. So this was a big part of the work I did. And I talk about this in the book. So if this strikes a chord with anybody, know that there's more on this in the book. I really had to unravel because I realized that all of my worth and all of my value was like, how iconic is the brand I'm working on? Is it global? Am I jetting around the world in business and first class? Am I, all kind of dolled up? It was all the shiny things. And I am not poo-pooing the shiny things. I still love some shiny things. Like, I'm not going to lie. Sure. And that's not my starting point. My starting point is now I'm so deeply anchored. And this is a powerful thing that I talk about a lot. Choose values over validation. So I think getting anchored, this is another thing. So this is all part of the, intentional choices and the way of being. One, values, two things, right? Our inherent value and self-worth, I had to go through that journey to get reconnected to my own, to believe in me and to know that I am just know I am enough. Waking up in the morning, I am enough. I don't need all those things around me, but I didn't believe that for the longest time. And I think so much of what people are attracted to in my energy and in my message is because I believe in myself and I believe in what I'm saying because it's the truth and it's the way I live. I'm also super clear on my values. And this is a great exercise for anybody who's listening, who's like, yeah, like I'm eating this up, give me more. I'll give you the link to this in the show notes. Let's put Brené Brown's Dare to Lead list of values. I use it with all my clients. I talk about it from the stage, and it's a sheet of like 100 values.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing is for us to go from, yeah, these 15 are kind of how I live and they make sense to me, to getting to 10 to 5, and then ultimately choosing your top 3 that really become filters for what it means to live an aligned life and what it means for you to show up as a leader. And when I got clear, mine are freedom, authenticity, and courage. And authenticity is tattooed on my forearm now. It says authenticity is the truest form of rebellion, because it is. The world wants us to be something else, and being ourselves is damn hard and so rewarding. But when I got clear about those, and even to this day, a great example is I'm super clear that if I get an invitation to stand on a stage and that company, their mission, the theme of the conference don't feel aligned with who I am and my message, it's a no for me. And I'd rather recommend somebody else who's a better fit to stand on that stage. And yeah, it sometimes means saying no to the money, but I'd rather stay true to me and know that something else is coming my way.
Sure.
So that has fundamentally changed my world. And that's something you can do in whatever your current place is in the world, in your work, in your leadership.
Thank you for that. I feel like there's so many nuggets of wisdom we're going to be able to take away. I want to ask you this question, and if you can just answer it in like 30 seconds, because I want it to be a takeaway for everybody who's listening. What are the things in your experience? What is maybe the number one thing that you think disconnects us from our soul?
The shoulds.
The shoulds.
I call them the shackles of should. And I think we are conditioned, especially as women, to tell ourselves again and again, I should do this. Success should look like this. I should feel this way. I should, choose that person's agenda over my own. I should please that person versus what I really want to do. And so a big part of my work, and something I talk about in the book too, is shedding the shackles of should.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. And you have shared so much of your book. Thank you. That's very generous of you. We will still go out and get it. I'd actually love to do it as a workshop in our Insiders membership, because I think this would be a great one for people to unpack as a community.
Let's do it. I'm in. If you want me to be a part of that at all, I'm 100% in.
I would love it.
Yeah.
But we've talked about all these things that you've done, this platform that you've created, and I'm curious how all of this work has liberated you.
I love that word, first and foremost. I think that was like that was the initial spark when I met you and I found your work, and I say I am on a mission to liberate 1 billion souls from success empty to successful. So liberate has been at the core of my being and how I talk about my work. So I love that. I think honestly, the liberating part is I am doing success on my own terms. My success currency is now impact. And I think about my successful is knowing I'm having an impact in the world. And so my new ROI is ripples of impact. And that feels so liberating to me that it's
so good,
right? It's not about counting dollars. And I trust that if I'm having an impact, the money will follow, right? I'm, again, gotta make some money in the process, but that's not what drives me. I'm really, really focused on my success terms, and they're aligned to my values. And then this idea that my success currency is impact, and am I staying true to that? And that is honestly the most liberating thing I've experienced in my 54 years on this planet.
Wow. Well, Shelley Paxton, thank you for coming on and liberating us in this conversation. I so appreciate you and respect the work that you're doing, and can't wait to do more with you. You're right. We are preaching to a very similar choir. And so I know this is going to fall on so many ears and mean so much to so many. Thank you for spending this time with us.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to more.
Yes, me too. And Liberty listeners, thank you for hanging out with Shelley and with me. We'll have everything Shelley mentioned in the show notes, including some ways that you can work with her to get to know a little bit more of what this idea of a Soulbbatical could mean for you. And we will talk to you guys next week. Bye for now. Liberty Road is broadcast on all platforms: Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and more. If you like what you've heard, please follow, rate, and review Liberty Road on Apple Podcast and Spotify. It helps us to know if these episodes are inspiring and equipping you to move into your middle third with intention. Liberty Road is created by executive producer Netta Jones, supervising producer Elizabeth Wyndham, producer Julia Wyndham, and music by Jack Jones.